Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, and your boy on social media at MMALOTN. This week we're covering UFC 318, which goes down in New Orleans, Louisiana, because it is the retirement fight of Dustin the Diamond Poirier as he looks for a third victory over Max Blessed Holloway. Also on the line will be the BMF title, which is, a novelty title, let's be honest there. But at least they get to add something shiny to the poster. But nothing needs to be shiny about this matchup because we know it will deliver, especially after their epic UFC, I believe, 236 co-main event slot where they went up for the interim lightweight title way back in the day. I believe that was April of 2019. Somewhat back and forth, but for the most part, Dustin Poirier get the job done that night. Let's see if he can make it 3-0, especially with Max Holloway leveling up way more in the last several years. Maybe he's able to, maybe not tie it up because it's 2-0 Dustin Poirier, but we'll see how that goes down. Co-main event features Roman Kopylov taking on former title challenger Paulo Costa. That could deliver some fireworks, but you never know what the case is with Bohachinia Paulo Costa whenever he steps foot inside the cage. I believe there's 14 fights scheduled for this card going down in New Orleans. Like I said, very decent card all around. Some people shitting on the name value of the card, but I still think it will deliver. For those of you that haven't seen the new setup as of yet, I'm almost done. At least it doesn't look like a prison wall behind me anymore. We do got the nice panels up there. Got a couple of things that I really want to tweak to make it look a little bit cleaner. But most importantly, getting those goddamn blinds up for that giant window that's right across from me right now so I can play with the light a little bit more and make it look a lot more clean, a lot more crisp, something that you guys have been used to before. And I hope it says it's coming in this coming week. So hopefully it's in ASAP. I can get those blinds up, then I can start using the studio lights and really start making things look a lot prettier, but slowly coming together. And I'm very happy with how it's starting to look. So fear not. The background will be put together sooner than later. But I appreciate you guys bearing with me over the last 2 or so months, maybe 3 months that we're coming up on now since I've been making this move. All right. Let's quickly recap the last Lock of the Night and Dog of the Night plays for the UFC. We've been absolutely killing it with the Lock of the Night plan. This is the type of accuracy that I've been, I've been known to hit at, but can really get into this type of groove to ensure that the Lock of the Night play is something that you guys can rely on a weekly basis. For this past weekend, we went with the Mike Davis and Mitch Ramirez fight under 2.5. I believe I got around that minus 138 line, minus 140. It got up to about minus 180 during fight week, and we did see some action coming on the over, which brought it back down to about that minus 140 range come fight time, but it didn't matter because we were able to cash that, and we went 3-0 overall on Lock of the Night plays this past weekend over LFA, Cage Warriors, and the UFC. That now brings our Lock of the Night record on the year to 36-23 for a 61% hit rate, but we have hit 11 straight Lock of the Night plays. We're 14-1 over the last 15 Lock of the Night plays. We're going to keep it going. We're pretty much at that break-even spot after that hole that I dug for myself. I believe we're about plus 40 units during this last 15 Lock of the Night play run. If you have been cashing with your boy, show me some love in the comment section below. Appreciate the love there, but we've really been turning the tide around after a very sluggish start to the year. Dog of the Night plays go 2-1 over the weekend with our UFC Dog of the Night play cashing. It was a very unpopular pick, but I felt damn good about Tuco Tokos to go out there and stifle Junior Tafa on the ground and eventually find that submission in the second round. Was it sweaty? Yeah. Especially with it looking like Tokos was starting to slow down, but Tafa is just that bad, and Tokos was able to go out there and get that second round submission. So that now brings our Dog of the Night record to 32-38 for a 46% hit rate. Still in the profit there, even though we're not at 50%, but feel pretty damn good about hitting that Toko spot, and hopefully we can hit another underdog that I feel very good about this UFC 318 card. This week is also PFL South Africa. which is headlined by Johnny Eblin and Costello Van Steenis. I will have that breakdown for you guys by either Wednesday or Thursday of fight week, so stay tuned for that. And then we also have KSW going down Saturday morning, all of which will be broken down on the MMALOTN Patreon page, which you can find in the link in the description below as well. That's where all those folks know about the Lock of the Night plays and all the other good stuff that I drop on there. So without considering all the runs that I've been on as of late, I believe, actually, I want to quickly confirm this number as well in terms of the amount of winning streak, the amount of events that we've hit in a row right now in terms of profiting, because we're running there too. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 event winning streak as of right now. Very happy with that. Let's see if we can keep it rolling into UFC 318. All right. Without further ado, let's get right into this UFC card. First matchup up, we got Lafayette, Louisiana's own Carly Judice coming in at -280, going up against Nicole Caliari, who comes in at +240 for this women's flyweight matchup. Now, starting off on the Judice side of things, she was originally coming off of back-to-back split decision losses, very close fights, but she managed to keep the judges out of it last time around as she knocked out Yunesi Dubé in the first round. I believe it was only 90 or 100 seconds that it took her to land that beautiful head kick to put her away, and that's what Judice normally does. In all 4 of her wins, she's won by knockout, and that has to do with her kickboxing background, where she goes out there and really puts together combinations well from distance and then lines up that head kick to get her opponents out of there. Trains out of Lafayette, Louisiana, like I said, under former UFC fighter Aaron Phillips, and this will surely be a home game for her, considering this fight taking place in New Orleans. Now she's going up against Nicole Caliari, who's coming off of a loss where she lost by, I believe it was split decision, to Ernesta Carrascate back earlier this year. And that was a matchup where she couldn't have much success after that first round. She's a fighter that started off in the Muay Thai round, but really taken to judo and grappling, which has led to a lot of her wins as of late. But she was unable to secure much of that success in the second and third rounds, leading to Carrascate grinding her out and utilizing her point fighting approach to touch her up from distance, especially in the second and third rounds. Now, Judice should be able to do the same thing here with her length and her reach. We got a 4-inch height advantage as well as a 6-inch reach advantage. It's really the strength of Caliari that gives me a little bit of pause. We saw some of the success that Caliari was able to have against Carrascate, who might be the same type of archetype of fighter of Carly Judice, who Judice went to a split decision with on the Contender Series, and it was such a banger that Dana White ended up signing both of them. So that is what gives me a little bit of pause here with Judice, is in case Caliari can get a hold of her, take her to the ground and get some good shots off and some control time, and that might be able to nullify some of the striking damage that Judice might be able to accrue. I'm expecting to see Judice utilize decent enough takedown defense, good cage control, chipping away at Caliari from distance, and I think she ends up going on to win this fight on the scorecards, but still a little bit skeptical because of the strength of Caliari, so I would think twice about that chalk on Judice. All right. Middleweight matchup next, where we got Bruno Ferreira coming in at -725, going up against UFC newcomer Jackson McVey, who comes in at +525. Now Ferreira is looking to build upon that submission victory that he had over Armen Petrosyan. I believe that was back in February, and that was a matchup where it didn't really seem like it was looking that good for Ferreira. Even though there was a point deducted from Armen Petrosyan in the first round of that matchup due to repeated low blows, we did see Ferreira managed to bounce back in that second round, even with the live odds looking like it was all on Petrosyan at -200, but Ferreira did not give up on himself. He eventually closed that distance, dragged this fight to the ground, and eventually opened up a position where he could sink in that armbar. He had the rear naked choke position again, or the back of Petrosyan. He fell off from that top, but held on to the arm and eventually forced that tap from Petrosyan. And that kind of has shown where Ferreira has struggled in the past. He's a smaller middleweight often in his fights, standing at 5'2" with a 72-inch reach, but he makes up for it for his strength, his power, and his finishing abilities, the way that he's been able to crash the pocket and land his big power or drag opponents to the ground and smash through their guard to get to dominant positions to get those finishes. This is also a guy that's finished 10 of his 13 victories in the first round, and then finished those other 3 in the second round, just with his pace and pressure. He's going up against Jackson McVey, who was looking to make his short notice UFC debut back at UFC 317. But after both Cedric Dumas and Christopher Ewart fell short on their weight cuts and various other reasons, Jackson McVey would not have made his debut that night. But now he's taken on somebody even more difficult, a steeper step up in competition compared to the guys that he's been squashing over there on the regional scene. This is a guy that's 6-0 with all 6 of his wins coming in the first round. This is a guy that's only ever seen the second minute of a fight 2 times in his pro career, as he's finished 4 of his 6 wins in under a minute. He's long, lanky, has a nasty choke game as well. 6'4", 77-inch reach. Here against Bruno Ferreira, he's going to have a 6-inch height advantage as well as a 5-inch reach advantage. He does have some stinging power, so that could help him when Ferreira is looking to close the distance here, just as we saw Ferreira struggle when he got knocked out by Nursultan Ruziboev, and even in some of the striking exchanges against Abus Magomedov. However, I don't think that McVey has ever gone up against somebody this dangerous, nor somebody that will provide him this much resistance. And I think that will eventually lead to Ferreira crashing the pocket effectively and either landing some big strikes to put McVey away or drag him to the ground and smash through his guard and quickly find a finishing position from that top spot. Minus 725 is kind of the limit of what I would parlay in any fight. I think Ferreira smashes McVey pretty quickly here. I don't think this looks competitive whatsoever. So I'm going to take Ferreira to win in round 1. All right. Heavyweights going at it here as we have Ryan Spann coming in at minus 210 going up against Lucas Brzeski, who comes in at plus 180. Now starting off on the Spann side of things, it's not been looking that good for him as of late, as he is now 1-4 over his last 5 fights. And his last fight against Waldo Cortez Acosta was his first one up at the heavyweight division inside the UFC, and it did not seem like it was faring that well for him. You're talking about a guy that used to weigh in at 205. He weighed in at 249 for his matchup against Waldo Cortez Acosta, and he just looked slow. He looked sluggish. He was unable to eat much of the damage from Cortez Acosta, who hurt him repeatedly throughout that first round until he eventually got that finish in the second round. Seemed like almost everything that Cortez Acosta was landing seemed to really hurt Ryan Spann, and Spann just could not get into his game. This is a guy that often relies on those early finishing capabilities with his big power, but also a nasty front choke as well if he finds opponents shooting bad takedown attempts. But he kind of reminds me of Kennedy Nzechukwu in the fact that sometimes he comes through with big chalk and just looks like it. Other times he comes through as big chalk and fumbles the bag, just as we saw Nzechukwu do this past weekend against Walter Walker. Now, speaking of Walter Walker, that is the only victory on Lucas Brzeski's UFC record thus far. Otherwise, he is 1-5 through his first 6 fights with the promotion. He joined the UFC back in August of 2022 after having a successful Dana White Contender Series performance. But you see him often struggling against the guys that he's going up against here. Out of his last 3 losses, he's been knocked out in every single one of them, including the 2-fight losing streak that he's currently on against Kennedy Nzechukwu and from earlier this year, and then Mick Parkin from last year. Brzeski at his best is a guy that utilizes a striking approach with combinations and good distance work, but it seems like his durability and speed has often been an issue in his game, which leads to him either getting knocked out or grinded out by superior grapplers. Now, this is a matchup where both guys are very flaky and very tough to trust, even with Brzeski nearing that plus 200 range. Ryan Spann should be able to land the big shots. He should be able to find that finish here against Brzeski, but I don't have all that much confidence, especially at chalk. Especially if Brzeski can start landing on Spann and hurt him, he might be able to put him away too. So this is a very volatile matchup. I'm going to go Spann. I think he's just a little bit more athletic, a little bit more capable of landing that big power and putting Brzeski away. But if Spann looks just as sluggish as he did last time around, Brzeski could definitely pull off the upset as well. But I'm going to go Spann here. Spann inside the distance, but not a whole lot of confidence there. All right. Light heavyweights up next as we have Jimmy the Brute Crute coming in at minus 285 going up against Marcin Prachnio, who comes in at plus 245. Now, starting off on the Crute side of things, he has no green in his last 5 fights. He's 0-3-2 in his last 5 fights, 2 draws to Rodolfo Bellator and Alonzo Menafield. He ended up rematching Menafield after their draw and ended up getting submitted, I believe, in the second round of that matchup. And things have just not been going that great for the 29-year-old. You know, he's a guy that came into the UFC with a lot of hype, especially with his aggressive BJJ game, but he's been getting tapped out by other guys and getting knocked out before he's able to get in on some solid submissions or even takedown attempts himself. His striking lacks a lot, but he tries to make up for it with a very aggressive approach, constantly crashing the pocket, looking to land his big power either to mask a takedown attempt or try to hurt his opponent so that he can get him to the ground that way and then try to apply his BJJ game that way. You know, I don't have high hopes for him. You know, there's plenty of fights and plenty of times I can remember recording this podcast talking about Jimmy Crute and kind of giving him the benefit of the doubt, be like, hey, this is a guy that can definitely bounce back. It seems like he has the motivation. You know, it seems like he's training as hard as he's ever trained before, but he continues to come up on the short end of the stick. Now he's going up against Marcin Prachnio, who is now 2-3 over his last 5 fights, most recently being submitted by Modestas Bukauskas in the 3rd round of their matchup, and that was a fight where we could not see Prachnio eat too many big shots without clearly looking rocked and dazed in some of these spots. He's a guy that often throws with big power himself. He has a karate style where he utilizes a ton of movement, utilizes that bladed stance, crashes the pocket with that blitz attack with straight shots down the pipe, but he often gets hurt with opponents landing big shots of their own, and they're either able to put him away or turn the trajectory of a round by hurting him badly and just really taking the momentum back in their favor. His takedown defense has often been sketchy, but he is a big, brooding guy. He turns 37 this week, so he's getting up there in age as well, and his durability has always been a concern in his game. Now, this is a fight where I'm kind of leaning the under 2.5. Now, this is a fight where I feel like the aggressiveness of Crute and the durability issues of Prachnio could produce a finish, but also on the flip side, if Prachnio can land a big shot of his own, he might be able to finish Crute as well. You're currently getting around even money for the under 2.5, and I think it's more than worthy of taking a shot in this type of fight. I'm going to lean Crute. You know, it's tough to get behind Prachnio, seeing how badly he reacts to a lot of those shots that he's taking, and knowing Crute, if he hurts Prachnio, he should be able to get that takedown, and from there, he should be able to sink in that submission. But tough to trust him at minus 285, considering the current run that he's on. Like I said, the under 2.5 is probably the best way to go about it, but the official prediction will be Jimmy Crute to win by submission. All right, moving over to the welterweight division where we got Adam Fugitt coming in at plus 400 going up against Islam Dulatov, who comes in at minus 550. Now, this is one of those fights where we finally get to see a debut of a highly touted prospect who made an absolute name for himself on the Contender Series this past season. But first, let's talk about the more UFC veteran guy here in Adam Fugitt, who is now 2-2 in the promotion, most recently coming off of a split decision victory over Josh Quinlan. That was a very weird fight, as both guys pretty much stuck with a striking heavy approach, really just going tit for tat with a lot of their strikes. It seemed to me Fugitt had done enough, but it just was very close, and it would not have been surprising at all had Quinlan been the one actually getting his hand raised in that spot. Fugitt is a guy 36 years old, and I had recently teamed up with the guys down there in Fight Ready at Arizona, trying to really mature his game. You know, he was a guy that utilized a ton of aggressiveness, a ton of forward movement, a ton of power shots, had a decent grappling game as well. But he was coming up short against the Michael Moraleses and the Mike Malots of the world, and that's where you were seeing some of the flaws in his game with, you know, the inability to take damage clean. His striking defense wasn't looking that great, and it's tough to tell what he really learned going into that Quinlan fight, but I think the more training camps he gets under those guys, the better version of him that we'll start to see. Now, he's going up against Islam Dulatov, who has been an absolute killer. This guy lost his first pro fight back in 2019 and has known nothing but victory since then, as he's pulled together 8 straight victories, finishing 10 of those in the first round and the other victory coming in the second round. He's a nasty Muay Thai striker with nasty elbows and knees, just as we saw in his Dana White Contender Series winning performance against Vanilto Antunes, where he landed a nasty elbow that cleanly put Antunes away. I first came across him when he was fighting for OKTAGON, and he put together a very solid performance there. But he's not just a Muay Thai specialist. He has some very nasty front chokes, especially that front choke series, that Darce, that Anaconda. He's very long and lanky for this division, 6'3", 75-inch reach. And I think he's going to utilize that effectively here against Fugitt, who I fully expect to try to take this fight into the grappling realm, but I think he's going to struggle to do so. And I think on the way in, he's going to eat some big shots from Dulatov, and I expect Dulatov to get him out of there. The question mark that I have for Dulatov, if Fugitt's durability holds up and he does manage to get this into deeper water, I have question marks about Dulatov's cardio, which kind of makes me hesitant in terms of taking that minus 560 line here, minus 550, whatever it's at. But I'd be interested in the inside the distance side. I'm assuming if he's up at minus 550, more than likely, that the inside the distance line is not going to be that much better. But still, I'll take a look at it, but I am expecting him to win. I don't think that cardio issue will come into play at all, because I think this will be done within a round and a half, and I think he'll showcase his striking dominance pretty clearly here and knocking out the man that is his 10 years his elder. So give me Dulatov, and Dulatov by knockout. All right, next up in the middleweight division, we got Atiba Gautier coming in at minus 550, taking on Robert Valentin, who comes in at plus 400. Now, it's kind of crazy to think that Gautier is 23 years old. He's 7-1. I believe he lost his second or third professional fight, has known nothing but victories since then, and has been finishing opponents left and right. This is a guy that often goes out there and utilizes that big power to put opponents away, just as he did against the ultra-durable Jose Medina in his UFC debut just a few months back. But this is a guy that wants to utilize that explosiveness, that athleticism, that power, that speed to really make up for some of the technical shortcomings in his game, just as we saw in his Dana White Contender Series matchup, where he was struggling to deal with the grapple-heavy approach of his opponent early, but managed to really put it on him in the second round, get that finish, and then secure that UFC contract. Trains at a great gym at Manchester Top Team, great head coach and Carl Prince, great training partners alongside Laurel Murphy and those other guys, but I have my questions about his technical abilities, especially when he's going up against guys that are going to start to be better in that realm. If he goes up against guys that can take his power early and really wear him down, he's going to start finding himself in trouble, and that's why it's tough for me to trust him as such a big favorite in a lot of these matchups. But you got to be careful about the guys that you're picking him against. Now, he's going up against a tough guy in Robert Valentin, who really made a name for himself on the last season of The Ultimate Fighter. Even though he lost in the finale to Ryan Loder, made a decent account of himself, a very violent fighter, nasty jiu-jitsu game as well, very good power in the striking realm, but we saw that grappling is often where, at least wrestling is where opponents can get the better of him, just like Ryan Loder did, and even Torres Finney, in a very weird matchup, right? Finney controlled that fight for 13 out of the 15 minutes, but only landed a total of 4 significant strikes. Valentin landed 23 significant strikes. Now, actually, one judge scored all 3 rounds for Valentin, even though he was being the one that was controlled the entire time. I think if Valentin was a little bit more aggressive with landing damage, even while defending, he probably would have won that fight. But that's where we're starting to see him struggle, is those big, strong opponents that can hold him in positions. But when he's the one moving forward, taking command of the cage, he can be very successful. And he might be able to utilize that experience advantage here, not to mention some of those technical advantages here against Gautier, to make this a much tougher fight. Now, I'm going to pick Gautier to win because I think his explosivity and power could eventually catch Valentin. But at plus 400, it's kind of hard not to want to take a little bit of a sprinkle on Valentin because of some of the technical aspects that he might be able to get ahead here on Gautier. Gautier might have a cardio issue going into deep water as well, something that Valentin might be able to take advantage of. Just a weird fight. I would not recommend parlaying Gautier. I'd consider the under if it's at 2.5, which I doubt. I'm sure it's probably at 1.5. But maybe late round props on Valentin might be a good way to go as well. But I think Gautier ends up getting his hand raised, probably finishing Valentin within the first round and a half. But do not completely count out Valentin. This guy is capable of pulling off an upset, especially in this type of matchup. All right. Next up in the welterweight division, we got Francisco Prado coming in at -150, going up against Nikolai Veretennikov, who comes in at +130. Now, starting off on Prado's side of things, he is now 1-3 in the UFC. His lone victory coming over Otman Azaitar, who he was able to knock out in the first round of their matchup. But you see guys that are technically superior than him in other realms of the game are able to dictate the pace against him and really shut down his power striking approach. The Jamie Mullarkey one was the most eye-opening one, and even though that was his UFC debut, you still have to wonder, if a guy like Mullarkey can put together the mixed martial arts game against Prado and avoid his big power, who else is Prado really going to believe now or be able to beat? I'm not shitting on Mullarkey, but to have as much of an athleticism and power advantage over Mullarkey and still not get the job done there, that's a big question mark for me. He came up short against Zellhuber after hurting him early in that matchup and then got completely squashed on the scorecards by Jake Matthews, being outstruck, outboxed, even failing to land with a lot of power on Matthews there as well. And that was Prado's first fight up at 170 pounds, where he seems to be undersized in some of these matchups, and that may not help his ability to land that power at this weight class and actually make it count for something. But this will be the type of matchup where we'll see if it works or not. Now, he's going up against Nikolai Veretennikov, who is now 0-2 in the UFC, had a very competitive matchup against Danny Barlow, but then ended up coming up short against Austin Vanderford, a fight where he just couldn't deal with the wrestling of Vanderford, ended up getting TKO'd in the second round of that matchup. But Veretennikov is a guy that, he's pretty good all around. He's 35 years old, close to being 36, I believe. Trains at King's MMA, often seeing guys like Benio Dariush and Rafael Cordero in his corner, has a good striking game, has a good grappling game. And I feel like this is a matchup where he can utilize the size advantage. He'll have a 3-inch height advantage here, as well as a 5-inch reach advantage, but not to mention his durability is often on point. This is a fight where he can really utilize that size against Prado here, and I think that he can really wear Prado down and utilize a full mixed martial arts game to really shut down Prado's power striking game. So to get Veretennikov at +130, a guy that I think is just overall better than Prado, Prado might be the better striker and have more power. If Veretennikov can eat that power and his durability holds up, this is a very winnable matchup for him, and I feel more than confident to take a shot on him at +130 here. So give me Veretennikov by decision. Hopefully he's able to pull off the upset there for us. All right, next up in the middleweight division, fun fight here, or interesting fight here, I should say, between Marvin Vettori, who comes in at +180, going up against Brendan Allen, who comes in at -210. Now, Vettori is on a 2-fight losing streak, most recently coming up short against Roman Dolidze in a fight where it just seemed like Dolidze was just, biting down on his mouthpiece a little bit harder, landing with a little bit more emphasis. It was 4-1 on the scorecards pretty clearly. I think it was just the third round where Vettori landed a big shot on Dolidze to hurt him. But outside of that, it was pretty much all Dolidze kind of just meeting him in the pocket and throwing big shots with him. Vettori is a guy that just kind of aggroes his way to victories, whether it's utilizing a clinch game and pushing his opponents up against the cage and, utilizing dirty boxing and some knees up the middle to just land that damage, or he just constantly stalks his opponents, moves forward, throws combinations, and just hopes to keep landing enough shots to slowly break his opponents down. It's crazy utilizing that type of approach that he's not much of a finishing threat, but it is effective. We saw it work against Roman Dolidze in their first matchup. We saw it work against Paulo Costa. He is a guy that's very capable of going out there and getting quality middleweight wins, even though if they are not all that entertaining or all that exciting. He's going up against Brendan Allen, who's now on a 2-fight losing streak after getting close to really earning himself a title shot. That first loss came at the hands of Nasruddin Imavov, who had a tough first round against Allen, and then Allen was unable to secure the takedowns in the second and third rounds, and that's where we saw Imavov butcher him on the feet, and even has some success from that top position, shutting down the BJJ of Allen and damaging him from that top position. But Allen is a guy that is so keen and so determined to get fights to the ground to try to utilize his aggressive BJJ approach so that it can try to get his hand raised that way. 14 of his 24 wins have come by submission, and that is often how he looks to get the job done. Trains out of Killcliff FC, has a great training camp and coaches and all that, but I think we've kind of seen his ceiling. His striking has a lot to do with just his kicks, and if he can't establish that, nor can he establish his grappling game, he often finds himself getting outstruck or just out-damaged on the feet and losing fights that way. Now, when I originally researched this matchup late last week, we actually saw Brendan Allen all the way up at minus 270. So it's clear that there's some action coming in on Vettori, bringing him down to that plus 180 range and Brendan Allen closer to minus 210. And I think for good reason. I think people are just overlooking Vettori, right? He's always that guy that's going to be a little bit grindier, not as entertaining. He's always going to be a guy that's tough to put away, considering he's never been finished, and his physicality could definitely keep him in this matchup. And I think that if he's able to shut down most of that grappling from Allen, he can force him into some pocket exchanges that Allen will not be confident or successful in. So I think this is a very winnable matchup for Vettori, and I liked him at plus 230. I like him at plus 180. I feel like the line is going to continue to close during fight week, and I think we'll actually see Vettori pull off the upset here, and I think he wins this fight on the scorecards. All right, next up, Kyler Phillips coming in at plus 145 in this bantamweight matchup going up against Vinicius Oliveira, who comes in at minus 170. Now, starting off on the Phillips side of things, he was defeated by veteran Rob Font last time around in a matchup where we saw the big flaw in Phillips' game come back to haunt him. Now, he had a great first round, getting that early takedown against Rob Font and enjoying a ton of control time from that position. However, in the second round, he was unable to get off on those takedowns and was forced to strike with Font, and Font kept him on the back foot, and that clearly slowed Phillips down throughout those last two rounds, leading to Font easily winning those second and third rounds. And that's where Phillips comes up short, right? There's often fights where if you look at the scorecards, he's losing that third round because, one, his speed has significantly diminished, and two, his grappling is just not working out anymore because he can't get the takedowns. And that's where we see him, start to struggle. In the first round, he's a top 10 bantamweight, no doubt about it. Very fast on the feet, good submission game, good striking, good grappling as well. But if you can't fuel that with a gas tank or energy, it doesn't mean anything. That's where he starts looking like a fighter that could potentially get cut from the UFC if he's unable to really keep it together past that first round. And he's going to be really up against it here against the guy in Vinicius Oliveira, who has all the momentum in the world, most recently coming off of a very dominant victory over Said Nurmagomedov, doing things to Nurmagomedov that nobody has ever done to that Dagestani fighter. We saw Oliveira pretty much just walk him down from the second round onwards, stuffing the takedowns, landing some big shots, and really dictating the pace of that fight with his power striking and his takedown defense. He did the exact same thing to Ricky Simone in a fight that he was the big underdog in, and I think he's going to continue to showcase that here against Phillips. Phillips might have some success early here with his speed and maybe even some of his grappling, but once Oliveira starts shutting that down, he should start to be able to walk him down, land his big power punches, just put that aggressiveness and that pace on Phillips that we know Phillips eventually breaks under. This is one of those spots where I'll definitely be looking at that Oliveira round 3 prop, but even at that current minus 170 line, and this is a line that I've kind of seen trickle, right? We've seen it go from minus 160 to minus 190, back down to minus 170. I'm curious to see how this line fluctuates throughout fight week, but I think this is a very winnable fight for Oliveira, and I think he makes it look quite dominant, especially if this fight gets out of that first round. So give me Oliveira, and Oliveira by TKO. All right, next up in the lightweight division, I believe this is also the first fight of the pay-per-view card, the main card. We're going to be talking about Michael Johnson coming in at plus 375, going up against Daniel Zellhuber, who comes in at minus 500. Now, starting off on the Johnson side of things, he's on a 2-fight winning streak. This is the first time he's been on a winning streak in 7 years, and he's going to be looking for his third straight victory for the first time in 11 years. We know the case with him, right? Very talented striker, good combination striking, usually has very good speed as well, and that allows him to touch his opponents up or even finish them. But it's been his fight IQ and his lack of durability at times that has often caused him some issues, whether it's, playing jiu-jitsu with guys that are clearly much better jiu-jitsu specialists, or striking in the pocket a little bit longer than he should and paying for those consequences, or paying with consequences, I should say. He's probably the best 23-19 fighter of all time, but he's 39 years old. He's getting up there in age, obviously, and that's something that you should obviously worry about, especially with a guy that relies on some of his physical capabilities to try to grind out some of his wins, or at least look for that knockout. His defensive grappling is very much improving. Obviously, when we saw him face Mark Casey, able to keep that fight upright and just completely touch him up on the feet. In the striking realm, where he is obviously most dangerous. And he'll definitely get many opportunities here against Daniel Zellhuber, who is a striker as well. A guy that is looking to really pick apart his opponents from distance and either score knockouts, even submissions by club and sub, or even outpointing opponents just like he did in his last victory over Francisco Prado. But in his last fight, which took place at Noche UFC back in September, he had an absolute war against Esteban Ribovics, and I believe he lost that fight by split decision. And that was a fight where he really was unable to establish his distance, especially in those second 2 rounds, as Esteban was able to crash the pocket, get into that pocket, and land those big strikes and really hurt Zellhuber in some of those spots. Johnson's capable of doing that as well. But the thing that Johnson doesn't have that Ribovics had was that durability, right? Ribovics could eat some shots, but I don't think that Johnson will be able to eat those shots from Zellhuber, who will be clearly able to land those straight shots from distance, but also make Johnson pay whenever Johnson wants to close that distance. Now, Zellhuber will have a, I believe, 3-inch height advantage as well as a 4-inch reach advantage, and he's going to be looking to exaggerate that as much as he possibly can as he chips away at Johnson from distance. But I think eventually he lands that big shot to put him out, and I'm going to take Zellhuber to win by knockout. But if he can't find the chin of Johnson, this will be much more competitive than minus 500 makes it sound. All right. Featherweight matchup here as we have Dan Ige coming in at minus 200 going up against Patricio Pitbull, who comes in at plus 170. Now, Ige is coming off of a knockout victory over Sean Woodson in a fight that was very weird. And what I mean by that is I thought Woodson was up 2-0 going into that last round, and he eventually gets caught by Ige, and Ige was able to get the knockout, so the scoring doesn't really matter. But at the end of it, it showed that Ige had actually won all of the rounds on every single scorecard going into that third round. So had that fight hit the scorecards, Ige would have won regardless. Very impressive considering the height and reach disadvantage he had going into that fight, but he continuously crashed the pocket, landed significant enough strikes for the judges to score those rounds in his favor, and that continues to show the veteran skill set, the pure tenacity and just veterancy of Dan Ige, who we know will never be a title challenger. He always comes up short in those big moments, fighting the Diego Lopez's, the Lerone Murphys, the Bryce Mitchells, the Calvin Caters, where he's just so close to getting a title shot, but he ends up coming up short against those superior fighters. But very slick striking. He's a BJJ black belt, but we don't often see him utilize it offensively. But he loves to mix it up in the pocket, utilizing good combinations. His striking, very high level. His durability, very good as well. And I think that's going to have to hold up here against Patricio Pitbull, a guy that I think he is very capable of beating. Now, Pitbull made his UFC debut earlier this year. That was back in April against Yair Rodriguez. He only landed a total of 17 significant strikes as Rodriguez pretty much dictated the pace of that entire fight from distance, utilizing his speed and his karate, or just striking advantage, I should say. Pitbull is a guy that often utilizes a lot of power, crashing the pocket, using big punches to try to knock his opponents out, but also has a decent ground game if he needs it, but I don't know if he'll be able to utilize it effectively here against Dan Ige. Pitbull is a guy that went 24-6 with Bellator from 2010 to 2024, but really wanted to end off his career in the UFC to see if he could at least pull off a couple of victories. But he's also a guy, 38 years old, just less than 2 weeks ago, he turned 38, and usually at these lower weight classes, age is definitely a factor. I think this is a matchup where if Ige's durability holds up, which it always does, he should be able to get out ahead in terms of the numbers on Pitbull. And it's not even the Yair Rodriguez fight, right? There's plenty of fights earlier on, or just recently in Pitbull's career, where he's just not active enough with his striking, hoping that he can land a big enough shot to turn the tide of a round or a fight by finishing his opponents. But that's going to be very hard to come across against a guy like Dan Ige. So I like Ige to go out there, put together a good body of work, maybe mix in some takedowns of his own, but I think it's going to be his volume, his pace, and his pressure that ultimately trumps Pitbull here, allowing Ige to win this fight on the scorecards. Now, similar to the Vettori and Allen fight that I just spoke about a couple of fights ago, there was a ton of line movement on this fight. I originally studied this fight late last week, and we were able to see Dan Ige around minus 150, and now he's at minus 200. So a lot of love coming in on Dan 50K Ige, and I have to agree with it, and I'm going to pick Ige to win this fight by decision. All right. Welterweight matchup up next, as we have the ever active Kevin Holland coming in at minus 425, coming into his fourth fight in 2025 in just 7 months, 7.5 months even. He's fought 4 times. This will be his fourth fight. He goes up against D-Rod, Daniel Rodriguez, who's looking to build upon his 2-fight winning streak. Kevin Holland is coming off of a nasty submission victory over Vicente Luque just last month. I believe it was at the beginning of June. That was a fight where he showcased his striking approach, obviously really hurting Vicente Luque, and then eventually locking up that anaconda choke, forcing the tap from the BJJ black belt. In his fight against Gunnar Nelson a couple months back, that was a fight where it was very close. But I think ultimately it was Kevin Holland landing that knockdown at the ending of round 1 that allowed him to get the victory that night by decision. Nasty striker, as we obviously know from Kevin Holland, loves to utilize that 81-inch reach to pick opponents apart from distance, but we're obviously seeing some of his striking game, his jiu-jitsu game coming to bail him out in certain spots as well. Not a great defensive wrestler, obviously, as we saw against Roman Dolidze and even Reinier de Ridder, but when he's the one in charge and dictating the pace with the grappling, he can be very dangerous with his submission game. Now he's going up against Daniel Rodriguez, who snapped his losing streak by defeating Alex Morono by decision, and then earlier this year knocking out Santiago Ponzinibbio in a fight where it seemed to hurt Ponzinibbio with every shot that he was landing. I don't know if that was much of a testament to Daniel Rodriguez's power, but more so the deteriorating durability of Santiago Ponzinibbio, who's getting up there in age. But D-Rod normally showcases great boxing, good combinations, good footwork as well. Unfortunately for him, I think he's just fighting a much better striker here and much more dangerous striker in Kevin Holland. I think this is a fight where Holland can utilize his speed and his distance management to really touch up D-Rod from distance, and I think that will lead to Holland eventually knocking out D-Rod within 2 rounds. We're starting to see some love come in on Holland, and a lot of people parlaying him, and it'll be hard to argue against that considering the stylistic clash here. So give me Kevin Holland and a Holland by knockout. All right. Middleweights going at it here in the co-main event, as we have Paulo Costa coming in at plus 215, going up against rising contender Roman Kopylov, who comes in at minus 255. Now, Paulo Costa is riding a 2-fight losing streak at the hands of Robert Whittaker, which was a fight where we saw Costa actually look pretty good. Hurt Whittaker a few times, but ultimately was unable to get the job done there, and then getting absolutely walked down and battered by Sean Strickland over the course of 25 minutes. Now, that was a split decision loss for Paulo Costa because one judge somehow, some way, scored that fight for Costa, even though I thought it was pretty clear that Sean Strickland won that fight at worst 4-1, walking Costa down and just outworking him, smothering him with volume as he always does. Now, Costa is a guy that normally utilizes a power striking approach, looking to knock opponents out and try to get them out of there quickly. Unfortunately for him, he has not won a fight by knockout in 7 years. Absolutely crazy. He started his he started his pro career 13-0. Leading into this recent run where he's now 1-4, which started off with that September 2020 knockout loss to Israel Adesanya. He's been very inactive, really not taking things seriously, and that's usually the wild card nature that he brings to the table. He's always in shape, he's athletic, he's powerful, but just his lack of commitment to the game really costs him in some of these fights where guys are just taking it way more seriously than him. And it's clear that Roman Kopylov is taking it much more serious than him. Now, Kopylov is 4-1 over his last 5 fights, a complete opposite of what Paulo Costa has been going through. But that one loss came to eventual title challenger Anthony Hernandez, who I believe will earn himself a title shot with this victory over Roman Dolidze in the next coming weeks. I think he'll have to fight one more time, but I think he'll eventually fight for that middleweight title. So it's not a bad loss at the end of the day for Roman Kopylov. But he's managed to bounce back with victories over Cesar Almeida and then most recently knocking out Chris Curtis in the last second of their 15-minute contest. Kopylov is a nasty kickboxer with some good power, often finishing guys in that second round, even though it looks like he's often slowing down. And that's kind of been the issue and kind of just flaw that I've constantly been painting on Kopylov is he's a guy that will slow down in those third rounds, but he continues to prove me wrong. Either he holds on to win on the scorecards, or he has a dominant enough third round and finishes his opponents just as he did against Chris Curtis. He's leaned on his grappling in some of his fights as well to try to buy himself some time so he can suck some wind, and he might be looking to do that here against Costa in some spots. But I think Kopylov is a guy that can put together his combinations better than Costa, maybe avoid most of the big power from Costa as well, and win this fight on the scorecards. But Costa is just too much of a wild card to fade at minus 255 against a guy that's still establishing himself in the ranked middleweights. Costa might be able to pull off a knockout of his own, and if he's able to take advantage of Kopylov slowing down late, maybe he's able to put together a barrage of shots and get Kopylov out of there as well. So I'd be very, very cautious in terms of fading Paulo Costa at this number, but I'm still going to take Kopylov and Kopylov by decision. All right. That brings us to the main event of this UFC 318 card, and it goes down between Max Blessed Holloway, who comes in at minus 135 as he defends his BMF championship against Dustin the Diamond Poirier, who comes in at plus 115 and is looking to leave on his own terms, looking to retire with a win in his own backyard in Louisiana. Now, let's start off on the Max Holloway side of things, who we last saw in October when he got knocked out by Ilia Topuria, looking to recapture his featherweight title. Unfortunately, it was not meant to be, as Topuria put it on him for the first 2.5 rounds until he found that knockout in the third round. But Holloway still has looked, very damn good. From his UFC 300 victory against Justin Gaethje, which delivered probably one of the greatest moments in UFC history, to even the beatdowns of Arnold Allen and Chan Sung Jung. It's his volume, it's his power, it's his pressure, it's his cardio. If he can just build a little bit more knockout power, I think that could help him in those matchups against Ilia Topuria and even Alexander Volkanovski. But if he can just get off on that volume, he can often rely on that durability, which he's only been knocked out once by Ilia Topuria, who we know can put down a bull, considering the type of power that he throws with. But Holloway often has good enough durability to deal with whatever his opponents are throwing at him. But he's going to have to build that power and build that strength as he tries to establish himself now at lightweight, after knowing that he's probably not going to get that featherweight title, especially with Volkanovski reigning supreme once again as he won the title earlier this year. Now, he's going up against Dustin Poirier, who's now 2-3 in his last 5 fights. The UFC gave him a championship opportunity after that knockout victory he had over Benoit Saint Denis last year, but he came up short against Islam Makhachev. That was a fight where he did outperform his big underdog odds, made it a little bit more difficult than Makhachev expected it to. And that was one where, the scorecards were kind of all over the place. That was, I think judges had the scorecards all over the place. 2 different judges had given him one round, while one judge actually gave him 2 rounds. But it didn't matter, as Makhachev eventually got him to the ground in that final round and sunk in the choke to force the tap from Poirier. Now, Poirier is returning and looking to end off his career with a win over a guy he already has 2 wins over. The first time he faced Max Holloway was Max Holloway's UFC debut when Holloway was only 4-0, and we saw Poirier get the armbar and force the tap that night. Then in their rematch, it was for the interim lightweight title at UFC 236, where Dustin Poirier clearly defeated Max Holloway on the scorecards 4-1, and I believe they earned Fight of the Night honor. Actually, I believe it was Adesanya and Gaslam that earned Fight of the Night. But if that fight had not happened, I'm sure it would have been Holloway and Poirier. But now it's been 6 years since that matchup, and Holloway has definitely upgraded and become a much better fighter since that. So I can understand why they're looking to put these guys together for the third time, but also knowing that they can just add an entertainment value to this fight and to the swan song for Dustin Poirier. But I still think that Poirier ends up going out there and winning this matchup. I think the swan song will be done successfully. I think he'll go out there and just showcase that there's a little bit more power and a little bit more oomph with these guys at lightweight. And I think that Holloway's going to struggle to make up that number, right? Holloway might be able to get more punches off here on Poirier here, but I think it will be Poirier landing the more effective shots, the guy that's landing the more impactful shots, the more significant shots, and I think that's what the judges will ultimately end up favoring. I'd be surprised if Poirier finishes Holloway. I don't think that Poirier has completely cracked the chin of Holloway here. Poirier hits hard. He'll probably rock Holloway a few times, but I think this ultimately hits the scorecards, and we see Poirier win this matchup. I think he pulls off the upside. I think plus 115 is not a bad line in a fight where he's shown that he can go out there and on numerous occasions beat Holloway pretty convincingly, and I think he can do it against him here once again this weekend. And new BMF champion Dustin Poirier as he goes off into retirement. There you guys go. UFC 318 fully broken down for you guys. Appreciate the love, appreciate the support as always. Let's see if we can keep this hot streak going. Reminder, there's also PFL going down this weekend as well as KSW. I'll have a YouTube breakdown for the PFL card either Wednesday or Thursday, and then I'll have KSW just in written form on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. Yeah, glad to get this out for you guys on a Sunday, and I'll be back tomorrow to give you guys my top 3 Lock of the Night candidates. See you guys then. Peace.